The puzzle box. A hand, long-fingered, gray-skinned, and soaking wet, slammed against the glass door. Behind it, a faceless figure in a dripping coat. And behind Mark, in the developing Polaroid still clutched in his trembling palm, the same figure stood, already there. Waiting. Waiting for 5 o'clock. 4 hours earlier, Mark's thumb, stained with blue ink, flicked the corner of a grease-stained envelope. He stood slumped over a sorting table under a flickering fluorescent tube that hummed at a low, irritating frequency. The kind of hum that burrowed into your skull after the 3rd hour of a night shift. The fluorescent tube buzzed. Dust motes danced in its sterile, bluish light. His gray USPS short-sleeved shirt was damp with sweat and something else. Coffee, maybe. Or just the humidity of the basement of the Bennington Postal Processing Center at 3 in the morning, deep underground, where the air never quite moved. The wet slap of paper filled the silence. Again and again. Letter after letter, envelope after envelope. The rhythm was almost meditative, almost enough to make him forget that he'd been doing this job for 12 years. Almost enough. A heavy rectangular package slid out of a bin marked, "Return to sender." It lacked a barcode. No stamp. Only a handwritten address in thick, black ink. To the one who remembers. Mark's hand paused midair, fingers hovering. The package was wrapped in tattered brown paper, the kind you don't see anymore. The heavy thud of it hitting the steel sorting table echoed through the basement. He reached for it. The fluorescent light above flickered, once, twice, casting the package in strobing shadow. His fingers touched the paper. Cold, damp, like skin that had been in water too long. The rusted box cutter was where it always was, hanging from its cord on a hook, bolted into the steel frame of the sorting table. Mark pulled it free. The blade was dull, the handle worn smooth from thousands of hands before his. He positioned it against the twine binding the package. The blade snagged on the rough fibers. He pressed harder. Then it sliced clean. Twine shards scattered across the table like shed skin. He pulled back the paper. The box beneath was mahogany, dark, polished. Geometric carvings covered its surface, interlocking teeth, overlapping gears, the kind of pattern that seemed to move if you looked at it too long. Which Mark was doing, looking too long. The patterns seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the fluorescent hum above. His fingers found a sliding panel on the left side. He pushed it. Click, click, click. A series of internal brass pins snapped in rapid-fire succession, a mechanical heartbeat trapped inside the wood. Mark tilted the box. A single Polaroid photo slid out into his palm. The photograph was white, blank, developing. Mark waited. The basement was silent except for the hum, the electric hum, the hum that never stopped. In the developing photo, an image began to take shape. Grainy, high contrast, black and white bleeding through. His eyes widened. The basement. His basement. The very sorting table he was standing at. The very bin behind him. The very fluorescent light above, casting its sterile glow. Everything exactly as it was. Except there was a figure in the photograph. A tall figure in a dripping wet coat, standing directly behind him, faceless. But with elongated fingers visible at the edges of the frame, fingers that seemed too long to belong to anything human. Mark's breath hitched. He spun around. Nothing. The basement was empty. Just the hum and the dust motes and the endless rows of mail crates. He looked back at the photograph. The figure was still there, still behind him, still waiting. The photograph slipped from his fingers and fell to the floor. Mark sprinted toward the heavy steel exit door, the puzzle box clutched against his chest. His work boots slapped against wet concrete, splashing dirty puddles upward. The door was 20 feet away, then 15, then 10. His lungs were burning. The rain was audible now, lashing against the glass of the loading dock entrance. Heavy rain. Outside. Waiting. He hit the panic bar with both hands. The door swung open. A hand slammed against the outside of the door, gray-skinned, long-fingered, soaking wet. It pinned the door shut against Mark's weight. His head jolted forward, nose inches from the wire mesh glass. He could see the figure now, could see the shape of it, but not the face. The face was always shadow. Rainwater ran off the gray hand in rivulets. Mark turned his shoulder and rammed the door. The figure yielded slightly. Mark stumbled out into the alley, rain immediately drenching his shirt. Cold, immediate, the kind of rain that felt like drowning while standing up. He swung the heavy box like a club, striking out at the shadows. The mahogany connected with nothing. With air. With the sound of the box whistling through water-thick atmosphere. The figure caught his wrist. The grip was like a freezing iron vise. Mark howled, a sound that was absorbed by the roar of the rain almost before it left his mouth. He dropped to one knee as the figure kicked him in the ribs. Not hard, not brutally, but with a kind of precision, like it knew exactly where to place the blow for maximum effect. Maximum pain. His body skid across wet pavement toward a pile of wooden pallets. His mouth opened in a silent scream. The breath had been driven out of him. His ribs felt like they'd been separated from the rest of his body, like they belonged to a different person now. On the pavement, his fingers found a splintered board from one of the pallets. Heavy, rough, splinters that dug into his palm. He jabbed it upward. He connected with the figure's chest. The figure didn't bleed. It didn't even stagger. Instead, it dissolved into a cloud of black, oily smoke that reeked of ozone and old paper. The smoke rose like breath in cold air. It dispersed. It reformed for a moment into the shape of the figure, that tall, coat-wearing shape. And then it was gone, absorbed into the rain, into the night, into the air of Bennington's industrial alley. The smoke matched the shape of the figure in the photograph. Mark lay on his back in the rain for a long time. Or maybe not a long time. Time felt strange now, unreliable. His ribs heaved, his lungs burned. Above him, the sky was black with clouds and rain, and the kind of darkness that feels permanent. He got to his feet. Mark sat at his yellowed Formica kitchen table, nursing a bruised rib and a glass of cheap bourbon. The kind of bourbon that came in a plastic bottle with a label that looked like it had been designed in the 1970s and never updated. The puzzle box sat under the harsh glow of a low-hanging bulb. The kind of bulb that made everything look sickly and gray. The clock on his kitchen wall read 4:30 a.m. His face was bruised. Not severely, not visibly. But he could feel it. The tightness in his cheekbones, the way his left eye didn't quite open all the way. His ribs throbbed. Each breath was a negotiation with pain. He stared at the box. The mahogany seemed darker now. Or maybe it was just the kitchen light. Or maybe his eyes were playing tricks. The geometric patterns of teeth and gears seemed to pulse with the rhythm of his breathing. He reached out and manipulated a second gear on the box's top. The gears were small, intricate. They required fingers with precision, fingers that weren't shaking. But Mark's were shaking. They'd been shaking since he left the alley. Click, clack, click, clack. The rhythm of gears turning, the shadows of the gears elongating on the table, growing longer with each rotation, growing darker. A hidden compartment popped open with a spring-loaded snap. The sound made him flinch. Inside lay a small, tarnished silver locket and a second photograph. The locket was old, very old. The silver had turned gray with age and oxidation. On its surface, engraved, E. Elena, his sister. Mark's hand hovered over the locket, afraid to touch it, afraid that touching it would make it real, that it would make all of this real. The locket had belonged to Elena 10 years ago. Elena at age 10. Elena before. He didn't let himself finish the thought. He picked up the second photograph instead. The back of the photo was blank. He flipped it over. The image was in color, a Polaroid from more recent years. It showed Elena, but not as she was when she died. Not as a 10-year-old girl, but as an adult woman, maybe 30 years old. 30 years old and alive. Standing in front of his apartment building, holding a sign that said, "Run before the clock strikes 5." The handwriting on the sign was his own. "That's not possible," Mark whispered, the words barely audible over the sound of his own breathing. "I buried her." He turned the photo over. On the back, in his own handwriting, "I didn't bury her. I hid her." The ice in his bourbon glass began to rattle, a sound like teeth chattering. The several new dark gears on the bottom of the box began to spin by themselves. No mechanism, no touch, just spinning. The high-pitched whirring filled the kitchen. It filled his skull. The ink on the back of the photo was still wet, still drying, still transferring from his pen to the paper. Except he hadn't written it. He was sure he hadn't written it. But the handwriting was his. The bourbon glass fell from his fingers and shattered on the kitchen tile. Mark wrenched his apartment door open. The hallway beyond was not the hallway, not the carpeted hallway with its faded green walls and fluorescent exit signs. Instead, there was a long, dark tunnel of stacked mail crates and rotting wooden logs. The smell of damp earth filled the air, the smell of basements, the smell of places where things go to rot. He stepped into the threshold, 1 foot in the apartment, 1 foot in the tunnel. The wallpaper of the apartment began to peel back like skin, like something organic. The dripping water sound grew louder, not from the tunnel, from inside the apartment behind him, from the walls themselves. And then, the sound of a heavy belt being snapped. A massive figure stepped from behind a stack of crates. Stained flannel shirt, work boots with laces tied too tight. His father's face was obscured by a shifting shadow, the kind of shadow that doesn't follow light, the kind that exists independently. The belt was in his hands. He swung it. The leather whistled through the air. The buckle caught the light for a moment. A flash of silver. Mark ducked just in time as the buckle shatters a picture frame on the wall. Glass exploded in a crystalline spray. Behind him, the apartment was transforming. The couch was rotting. The television was filling with black water. The floor was turning to mud. "You lied," the figure said. The voice was wrong. Too deep. Too hollow. Like it was coming from a tunnel inside the figure's chest. "You always lied." Mark surged forward, tackling the figure around the waist. They crashed into the mail crates. Envelopes flew like snow, white envelopes with their red postal service stamps. His father's body felt wrong beneath him, too soft, too yielding, like punching into sand. Mark punched anyway. His fist sank into the flannel. No blood, no resistance, just the sound of his own rage filling the tunnel. The mail crate splintered. More envelopes, thousands of them, millions. The tunnel was filled with them now. The roar of the tackle, the rustle of 1,000 papers. Mark's knuckles were covered in dry gray dust from the impact. The dust of old paper. The dust of the postal system. The dust of things that had been sorted and resorted and never delivered. Mark found a brass paperweight on the floor. Where it came from, he didn't know. It was just there. Heavy. Cold. The kind of weight you can feel in your bones. He slammed it into the side of the figure's head. The figure stiffened. Its body began to dissolve, but not into smoke this time. Into paper. Yellowed newspapers. Decades old. They collapsed into a pile at Mark's feet. He stood, breathing hard, his chest heaving. The headline on the top paper read, "Tragedy at the Well." Mark looked at his digital bedside clock. 4:55 a.m. The numbers pulsed red, then flickered to 4:56 instantly. Time was moving too fast, accelerating. The puzzle box on the table began to emit a low, vibrating red light from the cracks in the wood. The light wasn't coming from inside the box. The light was the box itself. The mahogany was glowing. A rhythmic, heavy thumping began inside the walls. Like a heart. Like something massive and alive was beating beneath the plaster and paint. The red light cast long, needle-like shadows across the living room. The shadows of the gears. Growing longer, growing sharper. Mark grabbed the box. The wood was hot to the touch. Burning hot. The kind of heat that raised blisters on contact. He turned the final gear on the bottom. The box began to unfold. Not break, not explode, but unfold. Like a blooming flower. Like something organic opening for the first time. Inside, a hand-drawn map on parchment. Yellowed, old. The edges singed. The path through the woods was marked in red ink. And at the center of the map, a symbol. A circle. A well. Blackwood Well. The clock flickered. 4:57. Then 4:58. The thumping inside the walls grew louder. Mark could feel it in his bones now, in his chest, in the space behind his eyes. The map was burning his hands, but he couldn't let it go. The map was the only thing that made sense now. The only thing that was clear. The red light filled the living room entirely. Mark stood in the center of it, the map in his hands, the puzzle box unfurled on the floor like the remains of something that had died. The thumping stopped. The light stopped. The clock stopped. 4:59 a.m. 1 minute left. Mark moved toward the door. The streets outside his apartment building were empty. No cars, no people, just rain. The kind of rain that falls straight down with no wind to move it. Rain that sounds like static, like white noise, like the end of something. His car was parked 3 blocks away. He'd driven to work earlier when the world was normal, earlier when time moved at the proper speed, earlier when his sister was still dead, and the puzzle box didn't exist and his father was still in his grave. He ran. The Blackwood Well was on the outskirts of town. The map showed a path through the woods. A path that looked intentional, that looked marked, that looked like someone had walked it before and wanted him to follow. His car keys were in his pocket. The clock in the car read 4:59 a.m. Mark drove. The rain was heavier now, the kind of rain that makes the road disappear, the kind that makes you feel like you're driving into a wall. Trees materialized out of the darkness and disappeared. Mailboxes flashed by like ghost signals. His ribs screamed with each bump in the road. The map unfolded on the passenger seat. The red ink glowed faintly in the darkness. At 5 a.m. exactly, the road ended. Mark pulled the car off the asphalt onto a dirt path. Trees towered above him. Old trees. The kind that had been growing for centuries. The kind that had seen things. The kind that didn't forgive. He grabbed the map and the puzzle box and left the car running. The path through the woods was exactly as drawn on the map. 100 paces. 200. The red line glowed brighter as he walked. Or maybe his eyes were adjusting. Or maybe the map was pulling him forward with invisible threads. The well appeared through the trees. It was old, circular, made of stacked stone that had turned gray with age and moisture. There was no water visible, just darkness. The kind of darkness that goes down forever, the kind that has weight. A figure stood beside the well. Elena. She was exactly as she appeared in the photograph. Adult, 30 years old, alive. She was wearing the silver locket around her neck, the one with the E engraved on it. She was holding something, a rope that disappeared down into the well. "You came," she said. Mark couldn't speak. His throat had closed. His lungs weren't working right. "They said you would come," Elena continued. "They said you would understand, eventually." "What?" Mark's voice cracked. "What is this? What do you want?" "I want you to remember," Elena said. She smiled. It was a smile that didn't belong on her face, a smile that was too old for her. "I want you to remember what happened at the well. Before they filled it in, before you told them the story, before you changed everything." Elena began to lower herself down the rope. "Wait," Mark said. "Where are you going?" "Down," Elena said. "Where I've always been, where they sent me. Come down, Mark. Come down and remember." She disappeared into the darkness. Mark stood at the edge of the well. He could hear her voice echoing from below. Or maybe not her voice. Maybe the voice of the well itself. Calling him down, asking him to remember, asking him to correct the story he'd told 10 years ago. The puzzle box was burning in his hands. The map was turning to ash. The clock, somewhere, a clock was ticking, counting down, counting towards something. Mark looked at the rope Elena had used. Then he looked back at the forest. The trees were moving closer. Or maybe they'd always been this close. The boundary between the path and the woods was blurring. The darkness was spreading. The rain had stopped, but the world was still wet, still dripping, still decomposing. He could run. He could try to run back to the car, try to drive away, try to reach town and pretend none of this had happened. Try to find a police officer or a priest or someone who could explain what was happening. But the clock was still ticking, and the voice from the well was still calling, and the puzzle box in his hands was still burning. Mark took the rope. The descent was not like falling. It was like being lowered, hand over hand. The rope was cold and wet and smelled like blood. The darkness grew thicker the deeper he went. Not dark like the absence of light. Dark like the presence of something else. Something that wasn't light. Something that existed in the spaces between moments. His feet touched something solid, the bottom of the well. He released the rope and turned around. The well was enormous from the inside, bigger than it should have been. The walls curved away into darkness, and in that darkness there were shapes, figures, hundreds of them, thousands, standing silently, watching him with eyes that reflected light that didn't exist. Elena stood directly in front of him. "Do you remember now?" she asked. "Remember what?" Mark said. His voice echoed. It sounded like it was coming from someone else, someone speaking from very far away. Elena reached toward him. Her hand passed through his chest. And then Mark remembered. He remembered the well, the one from 20 years ago, before it was filled in, before the tragedy. He was 15 years old. Elena was 5. They were playing in the woods with other children. There was a game they played, a game that involved dares and challenges and pushing each other closer to the edge. He remembered pushing. He remembered the sound. He remembered the silence after. He remembered his father beating him. He remembered his mother weeping. He remembered the police asking questions. He remembered lying. He remembered saying that Elena had fallen, that it was an accident, that he hadn't pushed her, that he hadn't meant to. that he hadn't meant to. He remembered being believed. He remembered Elena's funeral. He remembered the guilt. Every day for 20 years. The guilt that had become the shape of his life. The guilt that had turned him into a man who worked night shifts in a basement sorting mail that was never delivered. That was always returned. That existed in the space between things. The guilt that had created the puzzle box. The guilt that had created the figure in the photograph. The guilt that had created Elena, alive, standing in front of him, with her hand passing through his chest, reaching toward his heart. "You've always known," Elena said. "You've always carried it. We just made you feel it. We just made you see it. We made it real because it was always real." Mark's body began to dissolve, not into smoke, not into paper, but into nothing, into the absence of something. His hands disappeared first, then his arms, then his chest. The sensation of dissolving was not painful. It was like finally putting down something heavy. It was like finally stopping. The other figures in the darkness began to move closer. They were all Elena. Thousands of Elenas. Thousands of versions of the sister he'd pushed. Thousands of versions of himself. Thousands of versions of the lie he'd told. Thousands of versions of every moment he'd chosen to stay silent rather than speak. They surrounded him. And then, the well began to collapse. Not from the outside, from within itself. The stone walls were folding inward. The darkness was turning inside out. Mark was being pulled upward, pulled toward the light, pulled toward the surface. He burst out of the well gasping. The forest was gone. He was standing in his apartment, his living room. The furniture was all the same. The clock on the wall read 5 a.m. exactly. The digital numbers unblinking. The puzzle box was on the table. It was closed again. All the gears had stopped. All the light had faded. The mahogany was cool to the touch. Just a box. Just an object. Just something made of wood and brass and the kind of craftsmanship that went out of fashion decades ago. Mark stood in the center of his living room. His hands were shaking. His ribs were no longer bruised. His face was no longer marked. The bourbon had never been spilled. The photographs were gone. The map had never existed. Elena's locket was not in his pocket, because he'd checked, because he'd searched everywhere, because none of it was there. Only the puzzle box remained. He picked it up. The weight was exactly as he remembered. Heavy, purposeful, complete. Mark walked to the front door, opened it. The hallway was exactly as it should be. Carpeted, painted, normal. The fluorescent exit sign was glowing. An elderly woman was collecting her newspaper from outside her apartment door 3 units away. She glanced at him, nodded politely, returned inside. He closed the door. He set the puzzle box on his kitchen table. He made coffee in the automatic coffee maker. The same one he'd had for 5 years. The same brand of coffee. The same mug. He sat at the kitchen table and waited for the coffee to finish brewing. Outside his window, the city was beginning to wake. The rain had stopped. The sky was turning gray. Early morning gray. The gray of a world that hadn't changed at all. His phone buzzed. A text message from his work. Shift canceled due to warehouse flooding. Take the night off. Mark stared at the message. He looked at the puzzle box. He stood up and walked to his bedroom closet. On the top shelf, behind some old boxes of files and documents, was a plastic storage container. He hadn't opened it in 10 years. He tried not to think about it. He tried not to remember what was inside. He pulled it down. Inside was the locket. The silver locket with the E engraved on it. And a folder. A manila folder with his name written on the front in his mother's handwriting. He opened the folder. Inside were photographs from his childhood. Christmas photos, birthday photos, photos of Elena, photos of him, photos of his parents. And underneath them all, a letter. A letter written in his father's handwriting, but never sent, never delivered. Mark, I know what you did. Your mother knows. But we will not tell. For Elena's sake, we will not tell. You will carry this. You will carry it for all your days. This is not forgiveness. This is punishment. Mark sat on the edge of his bed. The letter was dated exactly 20 years ago. The same date the well was filled in. He set the letter down and picked up the locket. The metal was warm now. Or maybe it had always been warm. Maybe warmth was just his body's way of responding to things it understood on some cellular level. Things that had been part of him since he was 15 years old. He opened the locket. Inside were 2 photographs. Tiny, the size of thumbnails. One was Elena at age 5, smiling at the camera. The other was Mark at age 15, his expression serious, his eyes already carrying something that children shouldn't carry. He closed the locket. He placed it carefully back in the folder. He placed the folder back in the container. He placed the container back on the shelf in the closet. He closed the closet door. He returned to the kitchen. The coffee had finished brewing. He poured a cup. The steam rose up and fogged his glasses. He removed them and cleaned them on his shirt. He sat at the table with the puzzle box in front of him. He didn't touch it again. He drank the coffee slowly. Outside his window, the city was fully awake now. Cars driving past. People on the sidewalk. The normal sounds of the world continuing. The sounds of a city that didn't know what had happened inside this apartment during the dark hours. The sounds of life proceeding as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Mark could feel it. Could feel the weight of it. The reality of it. The fact that the guilt he'd carried for 20 years had manifested itself in the form of a puzzle box and a faceless figure, and visions of his dead sister and the geometry of his own memory collapsing and reforming. Or maybe none of it had been real at all. Maybe he was still in the basement of the postal processing center, sorting mail at 3:14 a.m., and everything since had been the elaborate fantasy of an exhausted mind. The kind of fantasy that happens when you've worked too many night shifts. The kind of mind break that comes from sorting other people's letters for so long that you start to believe in the stories that don't arrive. He looked at the puzzle box. It hadn't moved, hadn't changed. The mahogany was dull in the morning light. The geometric carvings of teeth and gears were just wood grain now. Just the pattern of growth rings and knots. Just the natural architecture of something dead that used to be alive. He picked it up. For a moment, he considered trying to open it again. He considered manipulating the gears and sliding the panels and discovering what came next. He considered following the puzzle to its conclusion, wherever that was. He considered. He set the box down. He stood up from the table. He walked to the bathroom and looked in the mirror. His face was his own, unmarked, unmarred. The face of a man who had worked a night shift and come home tired. The face of a man who had sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee. The face of a man who was pretending that nothing had happened. He brushed his teeth. He returned to the kitchen. The coffee was cold now. The sun was fully up. The world outside was proceeding with its normal rhythms. Cars and people and the sounds of commerce and routine. Mark picked up the puzzle box. He carried it to the balcony of his apartment. 7 stories up. The city spread out below. The postal processing center visible in the distance. The streets where he'd run from the figure in the wet coat. The alley where it had turned to smoke. He looked at the box one more time. Then he dropped it. It fell through the air. 7 stories. The fall took maybe 3 seconds. The sound of it hitting the pavement was barely audible from this height. A small crack, a small impact, a small punctuation mark on the day. He didn't watch where it landed. He went back inside and closed the balcony door. He took a shower, hot water that steamed up the bathroom mirror. He dressed in clean clothes, gray shirt, gray pants, the uniform of someone trying not to be noticed, the camouflage of a man who sorted letters that were never delivered. At 9 a.m., he made another cup of coffee. At 10 a.m., he sat on his couch and turned on the television. The morning news. Something about a storm. Something about flooding. Something about a postal processing center that had experienced water damage overnight. His shift was canceled. He had the day off. He turned off the television. He lay on his couch and looked at the ceiling of his apartment. The plaster was slightly cracked. The water stain was slightly larger than he remembered. The light fixture was slightly dimmer. These were things he'd noticed before. These were the normal degradations of living in a space. These were the ways in which everything slowly, inevitably, fell apart. He closed his eyes. He didn't dream. Or if he did, he didn't remember. His sleep was the kind that comes after emotional exhaustion, the kind that has no dimension, the kind that is simply absence, the kind that lasts until the body decides it's had enough. When he woke, it was dark again. The clock on the wall read 11:47 p.m. He'd slept for almost 14 hours. Mark sat up on the couch. His neck was stiff. His ribs ached in a way they hadn't before. His mouth tasted like sleep, like the inside of his own body, like the taste of time having passed. He stood up. He walked to his kitchen table. Where the puzzle box had been was now an empty space. The surface of the formica was clean, unremarkable, the kind of surface that forgets immediately whatever is placed upon it. Mark opened his laptop. He searched for Blackwood Well Bennington. The results were sparse. An old newspaper article from 23 years ago. A headline, "Local well filled in after tragic incident." He clicked on the article. The story was brief. 23 years ago, a child had died in the well. 5-year-old girl named Elena Carmichael. An accident. The well had been filled in to prevent future incidents. The family had declined to comment. There was a photograph. A young girl with dark hair and a serious expression. Elena, exactly as she appeared in the photographs inside the locket. Mark scrolled down. There was another article. From 5 years later. An update. The homeowner at the property where the well was located had begun excavations. They'd found something unexpected. The well had never actually been filled in completely. The top had been sealed with concrete, but beneath the surface, the well still existed. Still went down. An engineer had been hired. The well went down approximately 40 feet. At the bottom was a small chamber. Inside the chamber was nothing. Just stone. Just the natural formation of the earth. The excavation had been halted. The concrete seal had been reapplied. The case had been closed. Mark closed the laptop. He didn't search for anything else. He didn't look for more articles or more information or more confirmation that what he'd experienced had some kind of external reality. He didn't need to. He already knew. Somewhere in the part of him that had worked night shifts in basements sorting mail that was never delivered, he already knew. The puzzle box had told him the truth. The figure in the wet coat had shown him the truth. Elena, alive and dead, and everything in between, had been the truth. Mark stood up from his kitchen table. He walked to his bedroom closet and retrieved the plastic container from the top shelf. He opened it and removed the manila folder. He sat on his bed and read through the photographs one more time. Christmas. Birthday. Elena at different ages. Himself at different ages. His parents, younger, before the weight of the secret had aged them. He read the letter from his father one more time. I know what you did. Your mother knows. But we will not tell. For Elena's sake, we will not tell. You will carry this. You will carry it for all your days. This is not forgiveness. This is punishment. His father had died 5 years ago. His mother, 3 years ago. Both without ever speaking directly about what had happened. Both carrying the knowledge like a weight. Both passing it down to him like an inheritance. And now, the puzzle box had passed it down further. The puzzle box had made it real, had made it tangible, had made it impossible to deny. Mark put the letter back in the folder. He put the folder back in the container. He stood up from his bed and walked to the window. Outside, the city was quiet. It was past midnight now. The streets were empty. The cars were parked. The city was sleeping. The city was unaware that inside one of its 7-story apartment buildings, a man was standing at a window, looking down at the ground below, looking for the pieces of a puzzle box that he'd dropped from the 7th floor. But there was nothing visible from this distance and this darkness. The puzzle box had landed somewhere, had broken into pieces, had become rubble, had returned to being just the wood it came from, just the brass that had corroded it, just the machinery.